think it was Robert Fulfer writing the other day who observed with his usual acuity that there's not much .com going on at this conference. You would normally expect a conference such as this to be so fully engaged with the new media. And of course he was right. Very little of it up here, and I must say from a business perspective, none of it out there. All those people who are out in those seats, well, they've imploded, the budgets have disappeared, and that's why this year's edition is a conference of a different nature. But we did invite Don Tapscott back. He's a chronicler of this manifestation, and I hope he can come up here and tell us, where have all the dot-commers gone?
Well, I was actually going to speak about something else, but seeing as you asked the question. Last week I was driving on Highway 101 between San Jose and San Francisco, this ribbon of road that runs up the heart of Silicon Valley. And I think that it really struck me driving along the road that the billboards along Highway 101 are sort of a metaphor for the rise and fall of the dot-coms. If you were driving that highway 18 months ago, it seemed like every 100 meters there was a billboard advertising for a .com. And some of these billboards were $55,000 US per month. The garden.com billboard had a full garden growing on the billboard. Companies, .coms flush with cash from VCs would buy buildings so that they could put billboards up on their buildings. And I remember this Chinese laundry in San Francisco that changed its name to the New Economy Laundry. You know, clothes delivered on internet time, you know, 1 hour. Well, you drive up Highway 101 today, and it's a very different situation. Some of the billboards are gone, a number of them are empty, and the ones that still have ads on them have ads for things like car companies and beer and toothpaste. The plants on the garden.com billboard actually died and fell off the billboard. And the Chinese laundry is back to being a Chinese laundry. Welcome to the post.com world. Now, there's a whole little mini discussion that's grown up. What did all this mean? And it's become very clear that the period is over in human history where we think that the internet is about creating a great website that gets lots of eyeballs and is really sticky and becomes a big portal and is really beautiful, more beautiful than my competitor's website. Turns out eyeballs was the wrong body part. It's about hearts. It's about building relationships that counts. And it's clear that there were a whole number of mistakes that have been made, and this is very cathartic because it's bringing clarity to the marketplace regarding what the internet is all about. Many of these companies had no concept of business fundamentals, the notion of creating value for customers, that you create some product or service that you sell it to customers and they pay you for it, and that they pay you more than it costs you, which generates something called earnings. Many of these things had indirect models of revenue. All this stuff about clicks and eyeballs and so on, this was all based on these indirect revenue models, advertising, as opposed to creating real value for customers. There are all kinds of goofy accounting practices that came about through this whole thing, and Alan Greenspan was absolutely right to say there was a kind of irrational exuberance. Momentum investing set in. It didn't matter that some company was trading at 1,000 times their earnings. If that stock price was going to go up, everybody wanted to get in on it. Well, from my point of view, a lot of these criticisms, while valid, are somewhat superficial because these things were doomed from the beginning. They were creations of the VCs, and they weren't about creating value for customers. They were about market cap and creating value for investors. I mean, why would you spend all this money advertising along this little 30-mile strip of road if you're after a global marketplace? Well, they weren't advertising to customers. They were advertising to VCs and analysts and to themselves. These things lacked viable business models, and they lacked effective business strategies. So that's been very cathartic for people to understand that the internet is not about websites and .coms. It's a new infrastructure that's beginning to change many things in society. Now the trouble is that tied in with this carnage, there are some problems. First of all, this has led to a huge recession in the technology markets. I'd say it's almost a depression in some ways. It's like falling off a cliff for many companies. The average stock price of a hardware company in the last year has gone down 70%, a software company 80%, and for the median price of a software company has gone down 90%. And amongst the companies being devastated, there are a lot of babies sort of swirling around the drain with the .com bathwater, and this is not positive. There's another thing that's not positive about this as well, which is that a number of people are drawing the wrong conclusions. I'm up to here in debates with learned Harvard business professors and others who say, well, this vindicates what I've been saying, that the internet's not important, that e-business was a bust, and that there's no such thing as a business model, let alone a new business model. We should just return to the fundamentals. And what's happened is this irrational exuberance has kind of become a new sort of orthodoxy, where many companies think that they can just turn back the clock 20 years and just go back to traditional ways. That these are not only necessary, but they're a sufficient set of conditions for success. The return to fundamentals, long overdue, has become a new kind of fundamentalism. And to me, this is very dangerous. It was in 1994, Alan Weber was the then editor of the Harvard Business Review. He wrote an editorial and he posed the question, well, what's so new about the new economy? It's like 7 years ago. And in 1995, I wrote a book called The Digital Economy, where I said, well, here's what I think is new. And I talked about 12 themes of the new economy. And thinking about it today, I'm reminded of what Albert Einstein said to a physics class. It was actually an examination. And in the exam hall, when it began, one student put up his hand. He said, Professor Einstein, this is the same exam from last year. These are the same questions. And Albert Einstein stood up and he said, well, that's okay, because this year the answers are different. Well, this year the answers are somewhat different. First of all, there's no new economy in the sense that it's still capitalism. We still have private ownership of wealth. There's no state planning. There's a market, and so on. And it's also not a new economy in the way that people thought it was. Technology, right? People thought the new economy equaled the technology sector. The new economy stocks are up. NASDAQ is up. The .coms are up. Well, of course, that's wrong, because an economy is a system for the creation of goods and services, the distribution of wealth. A sector of the economy can never equal the economy as a whole. But, you know, Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. There are some fundamental things that are changing. There is a new infrastructure. You notice this morning, and in this conference, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the .coms, but there's been a lot of discussion about the internet. And pretty much everybody who's been up here that's referred to it says, this is really key to what I'm doing. This is a new infrastructure that's changing the way that we create wealth in societies, and I believe changing every other institution. One of the biggest changes is the corporation itself is changing. Throughout the 20th century, we created wealth through this thing called the vertically integrated corporation. It did everything from soup to nuts. Henry Ford owned a power plant, and a shipping company, and a glass factory, and a mahogany plant, because he owned mahogany forests in Honduras to get the wood for his dashboards. And he did that because the costs of partnering out there in an open market were way greater than the cost of doing things within the boundaries of the corporation. Well, along comes this thing, the net, which is not only becoming ubiquitous and high in bandwidth and all the rest of that, it's becoming rich in functionality. And this enables companies to focus on what they do best and to partner to do the rest. We've studied hundreds of these. These new models called business webs are killing the traditional corporation. And companies that don't change are toast. Want a great example? Any of you seen Business Week from this week? The cover story is on the top 100 technology companies in the world. Do you know what number 1 is? Anybody here? It's a Toronto-based company. Celestica. Have you even heard of Celestica? It has $14 billion US in revenue. It didn't exist 3 years ago. This is a company that does one thing very well. It puts chips on printed circuit boards. Now, it turns out it's hard to do that. 40,000 solder connections, you got to X-ray. It does one thing very well, and it's part of the business web of IBM and Dell and Hewlett-Packard and Siemens and all kinds of other companies that use this technology. Magna. Do you know who builds the Mercedes E-Type car? Magna does, including final assembly. Mercedes is a car company that doesn't make cars, or at least it doesn't make its E-Type. Magna does. So there are profound changes taking place in the basic model of the corporation. There are also many other changes that are happening. This is a knowledge-based economy. We create value by brain rather than by brawn. And the only meaningful form of capital is becoming intellectual capital. Knowledge assets are what count. There are many other changes that are taking place in terms of every other institution, universities, schools, and so on. Now, the one that I wanted to talk to you about today was a demographic revolution that intersects with this whole technology revolution, which is that the children of the baby boom echo, as demographers call it, is the first generation to come of age in the digital age. And these kids are different. Get ready. Who here, could I just ask you, who here has children or grandchildren between the ages of 3 and 23 years old? Hands up, please. Goodness, what a prolific group. Okay, those who put up their hands, which of those kids uses a computer? Hands, please. Okay, did everyone see the same group put up their hands twice? There's something big happening here. Now, I started studying these kids as a generation, and I wrote a book about this called Growing Up Digital. And I did this because I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated computer technology. At first I thought, my children are prodigies. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them, and the theory that all their friends were prodigies was, a bit of a stretch. So, so I started looking at them as a generation. And I'm talking in Canada here, so I'm going to tell you a story about something happened in Canada. I am a Canadian, by the way, but I don't get to speak much in this country. But there was a very seminal incident that happened to me. It was about 5 years ago. Pamela Wallen asked me to come on the show, the whole show for an hour. And she said, all I want you to do is surf the web with me. Live on the internet with cyber guru Don Tapscott. Some of you may have seen this show. I was kind of nervous because nobody had ever done this. I thought maybe this thing is going to be slow or crash or pull up something I don't want to see. But at the end of the show, I survived. The producer says to me, great TV. I breathed a sigh of relief. And I went home, and my wife was there, and she said to me, it was good. But she says, I think I have a story for this book about kids that you're working on. I said, yeah, what's that? And she said, well, I tried to get Alex, he was our 10-year-old son at the time, to watch the show. And she said to him, come on, Alex, let's come watch Dad. He's going to be on TV live for an hour. And Alex says, cool, Mom, what's the show about? And my wife says, well, he's going to use the internet on TV. He's going to surf on the web. And Alex says, Dad's going on television for an hour, and all he's going to do is use the internet? And she says, well, yes, Alex, that's the show. And he said, well, Mom, I don't want to watch that. That's the stupidest TV show I've ever heard of. Why would anyone want to watch Dad use the internet? So she said, well, Alex, people want to know about this thing. It's a big revolution, they want to know what it is and how you use this thing and so on. And he said to her, oh, Mom, this is so embarrassing. All my friends are going to see this. You don't have to show people how to use the internet, do you? So he'd gone to bed by the time I got home. Next morning, I interviewed him for the book, and I said, it's okay, Alex, just tell me, why didn't you want to watch the show? And he said to me, he said, well, no offense, Dad, but I think you adults, you're just obsessed by technology. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, this whole show on the internet, you think it's some amazing revolution, some big technology, disruptive, He says, imagine some other technology, Dad. He's trying to explain this to me because I'm an adult. I have trouble understanding things, right? He's going to use an analogy here, okay? So we're in the rec room. He points to the TV and he says, television, Dad, is that technology? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. And he says, well, Dad, it'd kind of be like a TV show where we're going to watch you surf around on television. Let's see if Dad can find a football game on TV. Wow. Okay, now Dad is going to find a sitcom on TV. This should be good. And then my daughter, Nikki, she was about 12 at the time. She gets involved. She says, yeah, Dad, or how about the refrigerator? Is that technology? Why don't we have a TV show? We'll watch you. We'll look around the fridge. See if you can find some ice cubes. Oh, check it out. Dad's going for the meatloaf. Oh, this is great. It really occurred to me that everybody's been talking about this technology revolution, its impact on business models and so on, but nobody noticed this is intersecting with the demographic revolution. This is the first generation to grow up digital. These kids are different. If you were born between 1946 and 1965, you're part of the baby boom, okay? Biggest generation ever. Birth rate dropped off for 12 years. Demographers call it the baby bust. In 77, the boomers started having kids, big time. And between 77 and 97 inclusive, they created this massive generation. Boom, bust, echo. This generation in Canada, the United States, and a whole bunch of other countries is the biggest generation ever. We don't get this yet. We call it the boomlet. That's a bad term. This is the biggest on the basis of their demographic muscle alone, these kids are going to dominate the 21st century. We don't get this yet. We're talking about the aging of the population. That's a bad term. The population's not just aging, it's bifurcating. And you want to know why the schools are in crisis? I'll give you one reason. There's this massive wave of kids coming into the junior high. But we don't get that. We say, gee, the schools are in crisis. What should we do? I don't know. Why don't we cut back on funding for education? Well, maybe that'll help. Okay. What's the defining characteristic of this generation? Let's name the generation, okay? Yeah, we could call them the post-Glasnost generation, or the El Nino generation, or the stock market volatility generation. But the really big thing is this is the first generation to be bathed in bits. Computers, the internet, interactive technologies are changing every institution in society. It's not a stretch to imagine this would fundamentally change the experience of youth. And you know something? This is not bad for kids. I did the definitive research project. Do you know, in terms of how kids spend their time today versus their boomer parents, do you know what the main victim of time online is? Yeah, it's not playing soccer, hanging out with your friends, or doing your homework, or learning the piano, or something. It's TV. TV took away 24 hours of the week per baby boomer, and these kids are taking it back. And when they're online, what are they doing? Well, rather than being the passive recipients of somebody else's, broadcast video, they're reading, analyzing, authenticating, developing strategies, composing their thoughts, collaborating, creating things, websites, customize. They're telling their stories. The experience of youth is changing because of this. And these kids have got capabilities that we can't even begin to understand yet because of this. When I was a kid, I was an authority on model trains. Today, kids are an authority on the big revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, every institution in society. This is the first time in history when children are an authority about something really important. Rather than a generation gap, it doesn't exist so much today. Kids and parents get along pretty well. I was coming back from the cottage with my son, Alex. He's just turned 15 now, and he's got a couple of CDs he wants me to put in. One of them is Jimi Hendrix's best hits, and the other is the Beatles' One album. And I'm thinking, yes, that's my boy. But he likes hip hop and stuff. But kids and parents get along pretty well. Rather than a generation gap, we have this generation lap, where kids are lapping their parents on this info track. And if you've got a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Who does the systems administration in your home? So, what are the implications of all of this? Well, let me personify it for you by talking about a friend of mine. He's a youngster in Toronto. His name is Michael Furtick. Michael's 17 years old. I've known Michael since he was 12. When he was 12, he was the project manager on my website, growingupdigital.com. They made him the project manager because he was the oldest and most experienced on the team. When Michael was 15, he had his own site that was getting 20 million page views per month, his own site. Imagine being Michael's parents. My friend John Seeley Brown says to me, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority for the first time. Imagine being Michael's teacher. Michael knows more about the biggest innovation in learning ever than his educators. Now, he wasn't allowed to use the internet at his school, so he wasn't sure why. They say he hadn't taken the prerequisite course that shows you how to use a mouse. We fear what we don't understand. The home, fear gets in the way of love. Post Littleton, this 11-year-old girl writes in, I'm at my friend's house. Dad just took away our computer. He's worried that if I use a computer, I'm going to grow up to be a bad person. Rather than using this as an amazing new communication thing within the house to talk about values and to share experiences and so on, we don't understand it. And we do the wrong thing. In the schools, rather than fearing Michael, why not hire him? That's what they did in Finland. They hired thousands of students to teach the teachers about the big new innovation in learning. Imagine being Michael's boss. Hi, Michael. Welcome to Dilbert Inc. I'm your boss. A boss is someone who is an authority on everything. Well, just a sec, says Michael. I'm used to being an authority on something really important since I was 11. I have a different view of what it means to share knowledge and communicate and collaborate and interact with customers and to support myself with tools. If we don't listen to him, he'll be part of a generation of entrepreneurs. In fact, in his case, the die is already set. Did you read? It was a front page of Globe and Mail. It's over a year ago. Michael sold his site, mydesktop.com, for an undisclosed 7 or 8 figure sum. The Globe report said it was only $1 million, and I sent him an email, and I said, Michael, that was their guess. I said, Michael, you sold it for $1 million. You should have called me. And he wrote back and he said, well, Don, legally I can't tell you how much I sold it for, but I can tell you I'm very happy. And he didn't want the money to buy a Ferrari, although he did buy a little car, but he's only got his learner's permit, so his mom has to drive around with him. He wanted the money to invest in his next new initiative. I did a session in the US with a group called the Business Council. 80 of the top 100 CEOs in America. So in the audience is Bill Gates and Michael Dell and John Chambers and Sandy Weil and so on. And after I was through, I brought a bunch of kids on the stage and I interviewed them, trying to wake these people up out of the mouths of babes. One of the kids was Michael. And one of the questions to Michael was, what would we have to do to get you to come and work for our company? And he says, oh, gee, very fine, polite young man. He says, gee, I'd love to work for your company. The way to do it would be as a partnership. My company will work with your company. Full-time, lifelong, exclusive employment? I don't think so. We treat labor on an income statement. It's called a variable cost. We're going to be able to think of this generation as a variable cost. Maybe we'll have to think of them as investors of their intellectual capital. Won't they want a return on that investment? Imagine Michael as a citizen. Is he going to be happy voting every 4 years? A number of people have pointed out, youth are disengaged from the democratic process. We seem to be talking about the wrong issues. In the United States, it was over a year. And the big issue, every day, relentlessly, was the sex life of the president, whether or not he lied about it. There are a few other problems in the world today. Politicians are now below lawyers on the respect scale. And these kids are disengaged from the whole democratic process. We could change this if we want. So let me just close by saying that we have a great opportunity. If we listen to children for the first time, maybe they can help us find the way forward. This is a time of great opportunity, and it's also a time of great peril and danger. I don't know about you, but as I travel around, I find many people wondering if this smaller world these kids inherit is going to be a better one. Now, how can we ensure that all this works out? We got a bunch of tough issues. There is a digital divide. The gap is growing in Canada and internationally between the haves and the have-nots. And around the world, 2/3 of the kids in the world have never used a telephone, let alone use the internet. A friend of mine works for the OECD, and he came back from a big conference on the environment. And he says to me, do you know what the number one source? He said, guess. The number one source of air pollution that's lethal, kills the most people. You may know what it is, but I guessed. I said cars, and he said no. And I said industrial emissions, no. The number one lethal source of air pollution is cooking fires. There are 1 billion people on this planet that cook in their huts, and it's killing them. You know, we have many tough issues. Privacy, each of us is leaving a trail of digital crumbs. We're creating this virtual you, a mirror image of yourself. We need to transform all our institutions. How about the universities? Peter Drucker says the campuses of America in 30 years will be relics. It came out of a period where learning happened at a physical place that's now obviated by networks, and where learning happened for a certain period in your life that's now obviated by lifelong learning. I hope he's wrong, because I think there's a role for a place. Marvin Dressler at Princeton, Dean of Sociology there for a long time, he says, Don, the great place about a university, a great thing about a university, it's a place where young people can go for 4 years and get older. And there's a role for these things, but we have a model pedagogy that goes back hundreds of years. Teacher-centered, one way, the lecture, broadcast. We can have new interactive models where the prof is freed up from being a transmitter of data to being someone who structures a learning experience. There are many, many tough issues. And my view on all this is that there is no technology imperative. There's nothing inherent in the technology that means that this is going to turn out well or not. Because it's not technology that designs organizations and corporations and governments and institutions of learning and families. It's people. So please get involved, not just in your place of work, but your community group, your political party, your kids' school, whatever. Bring your values to the table. And maybe if we do this by the millions, this new age will be one of promise fulfilled and of peril unrequited. Victor Hugo says there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. The time has come for this new communications medium. We're not at the end, as many people are concluding from the dot-com crash. We're at the very beginning of this thing. And hopefully the time has come for each of you to kind of, find that leader within you to change not just your organization, but our world. And let it also be true that the time has come for us to listen to the children. Because I think in their nascent culture, you'll find the new culture of work, you'll find the new school. Most powerful force to change the schools is the kids, to listen to them. And we'll find the new network society, and if we listen to them, maybe the children can help show us the way. The next period for sure will not be boring, so thank you very much.